Jack Mercer, a 47-year-old Army veteran, thought he'd left every ghost behind when he settled by the harbor of Port Talon with his loyal German shepherd Rex. But one stormy evening, a lawyer arrived with a letter written 30 years ago from Captain Elias Mercer, the last keeper of Wraith's Point Lighthouse, long presumed dead. Inside the envelope was a brass key engraved with a wave and a bell, and a message. The true heir is the one who dares to listen. That night, through the fog and thunder, Rex froze. His ears lifted toward the sea. Then came the sound, a single bell tolling from the abandoned lighthouse miles offshore. And Jack knew. Something out there was calling him. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The rain came steady over Port Talon, the kind that makes a day feel smaller. Gray sky, gray water, gray boards along the dock. Gulls called and then thought better of it. The wind carried salt into the little boathouse where Jack Mercer stood at his bench, sleeves rolled, eyes on a stubborn bolt that had stripped itself smooth. He tried the wrench again, not because he thought it would work, but because doing kept his hands from doing nothing. Jack was 47, broad through the shoulders, strong in the forearms, the kind of strength that comes from years of lifting what life drops. His hair had gone iron at the temples. The stubble along his jaw was a permanent decision. He didn't look tired so much as trained by long days to show less than he felt. Rex lay in the doorway with his chin on his paws, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a charcoal saddle and a white blaze at the chest. His ears tipped toward the dock every time a board creaked. When Jack moved, Rex's eyes followed, steady and warm. The dog had seen enough of the world to tell the difference between noise and trouble. The rain spoke like a friend who never runs out of things to say. Bills sat under a wrench, dock fees, fuel, the notice with red letters that always sound polite but never mean it. The old radio was quiet. Jack preferred quiet. It hurt less than news. A photograph leaned against the window brace, face turned slightly toward the sea. He didn't look at it, but he knew every curve by heart. Dark hair, soft smile, that easy tilt she had when the wind picked up. Mara Hale Mercer. He knew the way her name felt in the mouth, so he kept it behind his teeth. The sound of tires on wet gravel cut through the steady rain. Rex raised his head and sat up, alert but calm. A county sedan stopped near the door. The woman who stepped out was in her late 50s, tall, trim, umbrella in one hand, a leather folio under the other. She moved with the clean lines of a person who respects time. Her trench coat was the color of slate, her hair tied back neat, silver showing without apology. She took in Rex, gave him space, then looked at Jack with a clear, even gaze. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Margaret Haynes," she said. Her voice carried a hint of Boston and the steadiness of someone who has explained hard truths in small rooms. "Thank you for seeing me on a day like this." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "Didn't say I wouldn't," he answered, and nodded at the chair near the bench. Margaret placed the folio down, unfastened the strap, and slid out a single long envelope. The paper was thick and old. Across the front, his name was written in a careful hand, Jonathan Mercer. In the corner, where a return address might be, were 2 words, Wraith's Point. "This came into my custody under a delayed release provision," Margaret said. "The sender died 30 years ago. The county posted notices over the years. No answer until your P.O. box appeared attached to the Mercer name. So here I am." Jack turned the envelope. It had the faint smell of dry wool, as if it had waited a long time in a careful drawer. He opened it with his thumb. Inside were 3 things. A $1 bill faded almost to honesty, a brass key on a frayed blue ribbon, and a sheet of paper. He let the dollar rest on the bench. He picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. On the bow was an engraving, shallow but sure, a wave curling into the mouth of a bell. He unfolded the paper. The writing was strong, the kind that remembers how pens used to press. To the one who hears rather than looks. The light is for the eyes, the bell is for the soul. Bring the key to the place the map forgot. When the fog stands, listen. Captain Elias Mercer. Jack read it twice, then once more for the parts between the lines. He said nothing. Margaret watched, patient in the way good lawyers learn to be. Mercer, he said at last. Kin? Your father's half-uncle, she answered, keeper at Wraith's Point Lighthouse, disappeared in a storm in 1995. The Coast Guard shuttered the light. The county filed what it had to file. No body, no sail. Jack held the key again. Rex came near and smelled the brass, then the ribbon, interested but not unsettled. And this is an inheritance? Jack asked, glancing at the dollar with a small, dry smile. A token dollar for a legal will, Margaret said, but the will uses a different word for the property. Stewardship, not ownership. His language was plain. To the nearest Mercer who will set foot on the rock and claim the duty. Jack met her eyes. What duty? To keep the place, she said simply. To decide who needs its shelter. To keep it from being sold or turned into something it is not. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You know the difference between having a thing and holding it for others. He didn't ask how she knew his service. People like Margaret know, because it is their business to know. He looked past her toward the dock. Rain stitched the harbor. The fog felt close enough to touch. Something inside him measured distance without trying. The cut to the outer jetty, the run to the headland, the way a small boat behaves in heavy water. Old training wakes even when you don't call it. Why me? He said again, quieter. Because you'd open this on a day like this, she said. Because you still listen. She let the room be quiet. Jack set the key down with more care than he meant to show. He touched the dollar, then put it back where it had been. He didn't touch the photograph. He didn't say Mara's name. He felt the shape of it in his throat and let it stay there. Margaret stood. If you intend to see the place, take the morning tide. Harold Cray runs the ferry when he feels like it. He feels like it if you show up with purpose. I'll bring the necessary papers and meet you at the dock. She glanced at Rex. Good dog, she said. Rex accepted the compliment with a blink. She stepped back into the rain and folded into the gray the way a practiced person does. The boathouse took its old shape again. The rain spoke its steady peace. Jack stood with both hands on the bench, head lowered, breath slow. He wasn't a man given to sudden turns. The Army had taught him to proceed, to prepare, to act when action mattered, and to wait when it didn't. He looked at the key, then at the engraving of the wave and the bell. The design felt right in a way that had nothing to do with pictures. It felt right like a pitch you can hum. He slipped the key into the small right pocket where he kept things he could not afford to lose. He closed the boathouse and crossed the slick boards to the little house he called home. 2 rooms, a stove that cooperated often enough, hooks near the door for coats and memories. He made a simple meal. Rex ate with good manners. Jack ate the way a man eats when food is duty, not comfort. He washed the plate and set it upright to dry. He kept the photograph where it was, then after a moment took it down and looked at it. Mara's head turned just a little toward whatever had caught her attention that day. The edge of a laugh. He felt both the ache and the lift that come when love remembers itself. He slid the picture into a drawer beside a spare fuse and the knife he never needed. Some things belong where hands won't knock them by accident. Night came early behind the fog. Jack sat a while with the lamp low, listening to the harbor shift. People who have lived long near water hear changes that don't make sound. A pressure eases, a board stops complaining, the air thins. He lay down in his clothes, boots near the bed. Sleep moved toward him and then moved away. He let his thoughts walk the short paths they were allowed. Engine parts, weather reports, what time the tide would turn. The first bell reached him soft as breath. He thought at once of a buoy bell, then dismissed it. Buoys chatter. They don't speak with a full chest. He thought of the town clock, then shook his head. The clock's metal is too thin and its duty too busy. This sound was low and round and whole. A long note, a space, another long note. Not time, intention. Rex lifted his head. His ears pointed toward a place beyond the wall. Jack sat up and felt the floor hum a little under his feet. He didn't move for a count of 5. The sound came again, not closer, not farther, exactly where it meant to be. The room changed in the way rooms change when the outside enters without asking. Jack stood. He didn't say anything. He didn't say Mara. He didn't say Elias. He didn't say God. The words he had left were for actions, not explanations. He shrugged into his coat. He put a hand on the drawer, took the photograph out, looked at it long enough to be fair to the past, then set it back down with care. He reached for the key to check that it was still where he had put it, the small right pocket. It was. He knelt and put both hands on Rex's neck, fingers tucked into the thick fur. "With me," he said. Rex stood at once, tail low, ears high. The dog understood tasks and tone. Rain tapped the windows. Wind pulled at the edge of the door. Jack opened it and stepped into the damp, that clean smell the world gets after weather has done its work. The fog along the channel seemed to ease a shade, as if something out toward the headland had taken a breath and made space for a man and his dog to walk through. He paused on the porch. The water showed no lights where the bell seemed to be. That was a thought he put in his pocket next to the key. He locked nothing. There are houses you lock and houses you leave ready. This was the second kind. He and Rex walked the short run of dock. Boards flexed, ropes creaked, small waves tested themselves against pilings and learned again what wood will allow. Jack's skiff nudged the bumpers like an impatient hand. He set his palm on the bow and felt the familiar give, the way a boat tells you it still knows you. He didn't push off. Not yet. He wasn't going to row blind into a night that belonged mostly to the sea. He would wait for morning, for the tide Margaret mentioned, for the chance to step onto Wraith's Point as a man who had chosen it, not chased a sound. He turned back toward the house, and that's when the bell sounded a final time, lower than before. And, if such a thing can be true, kinder. He stood still and let it pass through him. It did not ask. It did not insist. It reminded. He nodded once, a small, solid motion that meant more than words. Inside, he wrote a short note on the pad near the stove, the way he always did before a trip, even if there was no one to read it. Out with the morning tide. Wraith's Point. He set the pencil down parallel to the paper. He checked his jacket again, the small right pocket. He checked the coil of line, the flashlight, the knife he had never needed. He put water down for Rex, though they both knew the dog would drink when he told him to. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. This time sleep came, not deep, not long, but enough. When he woke just before first light, the rain had slowed to a whisper. The harbor breathed like a tired thing finally at rest. He stood and stretched. He touched the doorframe on his way out, as if to promise the room he'd be back. Down at the dock, the sky began to lift from black to the blue that carries a little hope. He could see the outline of the outer jetty now, the small lighthouse at the end of town, and faint beyond, the place where the coast became headland, and then something the map does a poor job naming. Wraith's Point has that kind of shape. It hides until you look for it. Margaret would meet him at the ferry, papers in a folder, pencil ready. Harold Cray would decide whether the morning earned his work. Jack would bring his steady hands and the key with the bell on it. He would put his boots on the rock and see if what was written 30 years ago still wanted saying. He looked down at Rex. "We'll go see it proper," he said softly. Rex's tail thumped once against his leg. The bell did not ring again. It had already done what it came to do. The fog opened just enough for a path. Jack stepped into it. Morning broke slow over Port Talon, pale light stretching through the last of the mist. The rain had gone, but the air still carried its memory, clean, cold, and smelling of iron and salt. Jack Mercer stood on the dock beside a stack of old lobster traps, a canvas bag at his feet, the brass key hanging from a leather string around his neck. Rex sat close by, tail sweeping against the wood, head turning every few seconds toward the water. The fog beyond the jetty wasn't thick anymore, just enough to make the sea look alive. Margaret Haynes arrived exactly when she said she would, 7 sharp. She was dressed in a dark raincoat and heavy boots that looked borrowed from someone who knew the ocean better than she did. In her hand was a folder wrapped in wax paper. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Jack gave a single nod. "I've made worse trips for worse reasons." Harold Cray's ferry, the Larkspur, rocked gently against the pilings. Harold himself was already aboard, a man in his 60s with a red beard fading to white and the posture of someone who's been arguing with the sea his whole life. His cap said Talon Marine, but it was the kind of hat that had seen too much sun to still advertise anything. "You're cutting it close with the tide," Harold said when they climbed aboard. "Wraith's Point doesn't like visitors, you know." Jack smiled faintly. "Neither do I." Harold gave a grunt that could have been approval. He untied the ropes, and the small boat pulled away from the dock with a slow churn of the engine. The water was calm, only a soft swell under the hull, and the mist rolled around them in ribbons. For a while, nobody spoke. The sea made its own kind of talk. The groan of the wooden deck, the splash of the bow, the hiss of foam under the motor. Rex stood at the front, nose lifted to the wind, fur shifting in the damp. Jack watched him and found comfort in the dog's steadiness. It reminded him that the world still had things that knew their purpose. Margaret broke the silence. "I read the rest of Elias's will last night. It's strange. There's a paragraph about voices kept in stone, and another about a machine built for the heart, not the mind. Does that mean anything to you?" Jack shook his head. "Sounds like a man who spent too much time alone." "Or someone who heard something no one else did," she said quietly. Harold called from the helm. "Hold on. We're crossing the current." The ferry jolted as it met a stronger pull, and the mist thickened. For a moment the world went white. Then, through the fog, a dark shape rose ahead, a ridge of rock steep and uneven, with a single tower standing on its far edge. Wraith's Point. The lighthouse was taller than Jack expected, its white paint long stripped by wind. The lantern glass at the top was cracked but intact. Around its base crouched a small keeper's house, roof half collapsed on. One side, chimney black with soot. The sea struck the rocks below in slow, heavy blows. Harold brought the boat alongside a small stone dock and cut the engine. "You've got 6 hours before the tide turns rough," he said. "I'll be back by sunset. If I'm not, you'll know why." Jack stepped off first, boots finding the wet rock. Rex followed without hesitation. Margaret came last, carefully balancing her bag. The fog drifted apart for a moment, letting sunlight touch the tower. For a second, the lighthouse didn't look abandoned, just waiting. The path to the keeper's house was narrow, bordered by waist-high grass and the kind of wildflowers that survive by stubbornness. The door was stuck, swollen from years of storms. Jack put his shoulder to it, and it gave way with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. Dust lifted in the beam of his flashlight like ghosts disturbed mid-dream. Inside was a single main room with a brick hearth, a broken chair, and a table that had warped from damp. A few books lay open on the floor, their pages soft with mildew. On one wall hung an old clock, its hands stopped at 12:27. Margaret ran a finger along the windowsill. "It's strange," she said. "The place feels recent, like someone stepped out just a moment ago." Jack found a cabinet half hidden behind the stairs. Inside were journals, dozens of them, leather-bound, their spines labeled with dates in careful handwriting. EM 1988, 1993, 1995. He took the last one and opened it. The first pages were about weather and maintenance, wind speeds, bulb changes, notes on supply shipments. Then, halfway through, the handwriting changed. Looser, hurried, almost uncertain. One entry read, "The bell isn't ringing by wind anymore. I hear it before I touch the rope. The sea returns what it takes, sometimes as sound." If anyone ever finds this, remember, the light shows the way, but the bell calls the lost home. Margaret leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. "You said he was a keeper, not a poet." "He was both, maybe," Jack said softly. They followed the stairs up the tower. The steps creaked but held. Halfway up, light spilled through a narrow slit where a window had lost its glass. From there, the view opened. The sea all around, endless and patient. When they reached the top, the lantern room waited. The glass was clouded with salt, the mechanism rusted but still recognizable. Margaret ran her hand along the railing. "This could be restored," she murmured. Jack's eyes caught something near the far wall, a bell rope, frayed but still tied. He tugged it lightly. Nothing moved. "The line's broken," he said. "Bell's probably half gone by now." Then, faintly, from somewhere deep below, came a hollow clang, one single note. Margaret froze. "Did you hear that?" Jack looked down the spiral stair. "Could be the chain hitting stone. Or—" He didn't finish. They descended again, this time slower. Near the bottom, Rex began to growl, not angry, just uneasy. He nosed at a section of floor made of smooth stone, unlike the rest. Jack knelt beside him. There were markings, a spiral shape carved deep into the rock, old but not worn away. The grooves caught the light like wet ink. Margaret crouched beside him. "That's not decorative," she said. "It's geometric, maybe acoustic." Jack brushed away the dust. The spiral seemed to hum faintly under his fingertips, almost below hearing, like the low echo of a far-off wave. He pulled his hand back, frowning. "It's vibrating." Margaret looked at him, her lawyer's poise slipping just a little. "From what?" Before he could answer, the wind outside shifted. Through the cracked door came a faint, drawn-out sound, the echo of a bell carried on the tide. Rex stood, ears sharp, eyes fixed on the floor. Jack whispered, "The tide's turning." Margaret straightened. "You think this is what Elias meant by the bell for the soul?" Jack closed the journal and slipped it into his bag. Maybe. Or maybe it's the reason he never left. They stepped outside into the clearing air. The fog had thinned to streaks, and sunlight glinted off the water. The lighthouse stood silent behind them, but in the hush that followed, the echo of that single bell seemed to hang in the wind, patient and waiting. Rex whined once and turned back toward the stone floor, as if something still moved there, something breathing below. Jack looked toward the sea. "We'll come back after tide," he said quietly. "I want to see what's underneath." The dog barked once, short and sharp, as if agreeing. The next morning dawned thin and cold. The sky over Wraith's Point held the kind of gray that promises neither rain nor mercy. The tide was pulling away from the rocks, and the smell of salt and iron filled the air like breath after a long silence. Jack Mercer knelt at the edge of the cliff, looking down where the sea had drawn back, exposing black stone and half-drowned kelp. Rex stood beside him, alert, tail still, his fur slicked by the damp wind. Behind them, the lighthouse loomed against the fog, its white paint peeling in sheets that fluttered like tired sails. Margaret Haynes came up the path, notebook in hand, her hair pulled into a bun that the wind was slowly undoing. "I didn't sleep much," she said, half smiling. "That sound? I kept thinking about it." Jack didn't look away from the rocks. "It wasn't the wind." "No," she said softly. "It wasn't." They went back into the keeper's house. Morning light slanted through cracks in the boards, turning dust into pale threads of gold. Jack pushed aside the small table, exposing the spiral symbol on the floor. The air above it felt faintly alive, a slow pulse that matched no heartbeat. He touched the grooves again, still cool, still humming, though the tide was out now. Margaret crouched beside him. "You think there's a chamber underneath?" "I think Elias built something down there," Jack said. "He talked about sound like it was alive. Maybe he gave it a place to live." Rex sniffed at the edges of the carving, then pounded twice at the center. There was a faint click, almost delicate, and a seam appeared in the stone, barely visible but real. Jack caught his breath. He ran his fingers along the edge until he found a hidden hinge, rusted but intact. Together, he and Margaret lifted the panel. Beneath was a narrow staircase curling downward, its walls lined with slick moss. A cold draft came up from below, carrying the faint tang of salt water and something metallic. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not seriously going down there without gear, are you?" Jack gave her a small, steady look. "I've gone into worse holes for less reason." He took the flashlight from his belt, tested the beam, then started down. Rex followed immediately, paws sure on the wet steps. Margaret hesitated for half a heartbeat, then sighed and came after them. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The stone walls gave way to metal, old iron plates bolted together, their seams sealed with some kind of resin that had aged into amber. At the bottom, the stair opened into a circular room. The walls shimmered faintly with condensation. Strange instruments were scattered across tables, copper tubes, glass globes, and coiled wires shaped like the inside of a seashell. The smell was sharp, ozone and brine. At the center of the room stood a large device, half machine, half sculpture. It looked like an organ built from ship parts and coral, its pipes rising toward the low ceiling, its surface engraved with delicate spirals that echoed the mark above. In the middle was a console of brass with a single lever and a series of small resonant plates that looked like tuning forks frozen in mid-song. Margaret turned in slow awe. "What is this place?" Jack moved closer to the machine. "Elias called it the Echo Loom," he said quietly. "It's written in his journal. He thought sound could remember, the way metal holds a dent or salt keeps the sea's taste." Margaret frowned. "You think this remembers sound?" "Not sound," Jack said, eyes fixed on the brass console. "Voices." He brushed dust from the lever, then pulled it slightly. The machine stirred, a faint hum rolling through the chamber like a held breath. Rex tensed, ears forward. A series of lights flickered along the copper coils, soft, uncertain glows, like reflections from another world. Then came the sound. Not a voice yet, but a tone so low it felt more than heard. The walls trembled, the glass jars quivered, and Jack's chest seemed to vibrate with the same frequency. The tone shifted, forming a pattern, a rhythm, almost like breathing. Margaret stepped back. "Jack, that frequency, it's affecting the air pressure." But Jack didn't answer. The sound was changing, rising into faint, broken syllables. For a moment, he thought it was wind. Then the shape of it formed something familiar. "Jack?" His name. Soft, uncertain, but hers. Mara. He froze. The air in the chamber grew heavy, his pulse loud in his ears. He turned toward the machine, lips parted. "Mara?" The sound wavered again, fragmented like a radio signal lost in fog. "You listen. Promise." Jack took a half-step closer, every nerve drawn tight. "I'm here," he whispered. Margaret grabbed his arm. "Jack, stop. This could be some kind of stored audio. It's not her." But the tone deepened again, not cruel, not mechanical. It sounded alive, and it was saying something he hadn't heard in years, his wife's last words before the accident. "Don't let it go quiet." The light on the brass console dimmed, then went out. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of the sea pressing faintly through the rock. Jack stood there, motionless, the key on his chest trembling slightly against his shirt. Rex whined softly and nudged his leg. Margaret let go of his arm and exhaled slowly. "What did you hear?" she asked. Jack's eyes were distant. "A promise I didn't keep." Margaret looked at the device again, her voice steady but low. "This machine, whatever it does, it's not just science. It's something deeper, maybe emotional frequency resonance. People used to think sound could carry memory in water molecules." He shook his head. "This wasn't memory. It was her." The silence that followed was deep enough to have weight. Then Rex began to paw at the far wall, nails, clicking against metal. A faint hollow note answered each strike. Jack crouched, pressed his ear to the surface. There was space behind it, a tunnel or a vent. Margaret knelt beside him. "Air's moving through there," she said. "You feel that? There's something beyond." Jack's flashlight beam caught a small lever near the base of the machine. It was almost hidden beneath the copper coils, etched with a symbol, a spiral, just like the one upstairs. He touched it gently, but before he could pull it, a faint rhythmic vibration rolled through the floor. Rex barked once, sharp and warning. Then again. The vibration came again, clearer now, like breathing, slow, steady, alive. The air seemed to move toward the hidden wall and back, as if something beyond it were inhaling. Margaret whispered, "Jack, there's something behind there." Jack rose to his feet. "We'll find out when the tide's low again," he said quietly. "Whatever Elias built, it isn't finished talking." Rex's gaze never left the metal wall. His ears were flat, but he didn't growl. It was the look of a creature that senses life where none should be. They climbed the stairs back into the light, the air warmer now after the chill below. Outside, gulls wheeled above the cliffs, their cries thin but familiar. Jack turned once to look back at the lighthouse door. The sound of the sea below had changed. There was a new tone hidden in the waves, something that seemed to echo what they'd heard in the chamber, a promise repeated. The storm rolled in without warning. By late afternoon, the sky over Wraith's Point had darkened into a bruise, and the sea below began to roar like something waking from a long sleep. The first flash of lightning turned the waves white for a heartbeat, then black again. Jack Mercer stood in the lantern room of the lighthouse, one hand on the rusted railing, watching the horizon dissolve. Beside him, Rex paced restlessly, tail low, nose twitching at the static that buzzed through the air. Margaret Haynes had taken refuge in the keeper's house, though refuge was a generous word for a place where the wind came through the walls. Through the open door, her voice carried faintly. "Jack, it's getting bad out there. You should come down." But Jack didn't move. His eyes were on the old mechanism before him, the copper and glass heart of the echo loom, which they'd moved upstairs that morning to reconnect the beacon's original wiring. The storm's low pressure seemed to wake the device, its plates trembling, faint light running through the coils. It almost looked alive. Margaret climbed up to him, clutching her coat against the wind. "We need to shut that thing off before it shorts out the tower." Jack shook his head. "It's not running on power," he said. "It's pulling from the storm. Listen." The wind howled through the broken window, but beneath it another rhythm was growing, a slow, pulsing tone that seemed to rise from the sea itself. It matched the pitch they had recorded the night before in the chamber. The bell's call stretched and deepened by the storm. Rex whined, pawing at the floor. The lighthouse seemed to vibrate in sympathy. Jack turned a knob on the console and the sound sharpened. "Elias said the bell called the lost home," he murmured. "Maybe it wasn't just a metaphor." Before Margaret could reply, the radio on the shelf crackled to life. A male voice cut through the static, broken, urgent. "Mayday? This is the Halcyon. Lost power in the storm, bearing east of Wraith's Point, taking on water." Jack snatched the receiver. "This is Wraith's Point Lighthouse. We hear you. Hold position if you can. We're sending signal." Margaret's eyes widened. "Jack, the Coast Guard station's offline. The last storm took out the relay tower." "I know," Jack said, already moving toward the bell rope. "Then we'll do this the old way." He found the backup cable they'd repaired earlier that week, the one that led down through the structure to the great bronze bell outside. The rope had snapped years ago, but the mechanism still worked manually if you knew where to pull. He wrapped his hands around the handle, looked at Margaret. "You still remember Morse code from law school?" "Barely." He smiled faintly. "Good enough." He began ringing the bell in short and long bursts, the notes carried out by the wind. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then again, slower. Each strike sent a shudder through the tower. Down below, the sea caught the echoes and threw them back like an answer. Margaret pressed the radio to her ear. "They're hearing it," she shouted over the noise. "The signal's coming through their sonar. Jack, it's working." Another flash of lightning split the sky. For a second, Jack saw the ship out there, a dark silhouette tossed between the waves, smaller than he'd imagined, fighting to stay upright. The next gust nearly tore the door from its hinges. Water sprayed through the cracks. Margaret ducked behind the console, shielding her face. "We need to shut it down before the tower blows apart." Jack shook his head, teeth gritted. "Not yet. They're still out there." Then the impossible happened. The storm's roar faded for a breath, replaced by a single, deep tone. Not the bell, not the thunder, something else entirely. The floor beneath them hummed, and the brass plates of the echo loom lit up with blue light, brighter than before. Margaret stared in disbelief. "It's responding to the ship's signal. Jack, it's amplifying the resonance." The bell rang once more on its own, a long, mournful note that made the air tremble. Rex barked sharply, then fell silent, his gaze fixed on the sea. In that instant, the wind changed direction, shifting as if drawn outward from the coast. On the radio, the voice came again, clearer now. "Halcyon to Wraith's Point. We've regained control, following your beacon. God bless you." The rest was lost to static, but the relief was unmistakable. Jack let the rope fall and leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Outside, the rain still came, but the fury of the storm had broken. Margaret stood beside him, soaked and wide-eyed. "You did it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, it did." Down below, the great bell gave one last gentle chime. Then silence. Not empty, but peaceful. They stayed that way for a while, listening to the slow retreat of the storm. Rex settled by the door, head on his paws, eyes half closed. Margaret finally spoke. "You realize what this means, don't you? that machine of Elias's. It can transmit emotion through sound, not just radio waves, but resonance that reaches people directly. That's why they responded so fast. Jack turned the key that hung around his neck. Elias built it for hope, he said, not for profit. As if summoned by the thought, headlights cut through the thinning fog at the base of the island. A sleek black boat approached, marked with the emblem of Neurosound Laboratories. Margaret frowned. "I thought you said you hadn't told anyone about this." "I didn't." The boat docked. 3 figures stepped out, their raincoats too clean for real weather. At their center walked a tall man in his early 40s, pale and sharp, his black hair slicked back despite the wind. Carried himself with the ease of someone who'd already bought everything he wanted. "Dr. Victor Kane," Margaret murmured, "CEO of Neurosound. I've read about him, acoustic therapy, emotional frequency mapping, and lawsuits." Jack's jaw tightened. "Perfect." Kane climbed the steps slowly, smiling without warmth. "Mr. Mercer," he called, voice carrying unnaturally well through the fading wind. "You've done something extraordinary up there. The world's been trying to bridge memory and sound for decades. You've done it in one storm." Jack crossed his arms. "I didn't do anything. The sea did." Kane chuckled. "Poetic, but untrue. What you have in that lighthouse isn't weather. It's technology. And technology belongs to those who understand it." Margaret stepped forward. "Wraith's Point is under private stewardship. You have no claim here." Kane turned his gaze on her, polite but cold. "Miss Haynes, you're a lawyer. You know ownership and stewardship aren't the same thing. What I offer is partnership. We replicate the Echo Loom, refine its design, and use it for emotional rehabilitation, veterans, trauma patients, the bereaved. Imagine the funding, the reach, the lives changed." Jack's voice was quiet but sharp. "You mean the profits?" Kane smiled faintly. "The two are rarely separate, Mr. Mercer." Lightning flickered again far out at sea, but the storm was already dying. The light fell across Kane's face, making his eyes look hollow, calculating. "You don't understand what you've found," he said. "That device can let people hear voices long gone. Do you know what that means? No one ever has to say goodbye again." Jack's answer was simple. Some goodbyes are what keep us human. For a moment, the only sound was the sea. Then Kane straightened his coat. "Think about it. I'll be in touch." He gestured to his team, and they returned to the boat, leaving silence in their wake. Margaret exhaled, shaking her head. "That man doesn't stop until he owns what he wants." Jack looked back at the tower, its light flickering weakly through the fog. Then he's in for a long fight. He reached down to scratch Rex behind the ears. The dog looked up at him, calm again, as if knowing that peace never lasts long in places where the sea can still hear. 3 nights had passed since the storm that saved the Halcyon, but peace never lasts long at sea. The storm that came 3 nights later was worse than any the town of Port Talon could remember. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Waves struck the rocks of Wraith's Point like fists, throwing white spray 30 feet into the air. The lighthouse stood in the center of it all, trembling but unbroken, its glass eye blind and waiting for purpose. Jack Mercer worked by lantern light inside the tower, trying to keep the generators from drowning in salt water. The old copper coils of the Echo Loom thrummed faintly beside him, as if sensing the storm's pulse and answering it. Margaret Haynes stood by the stairwell, her hair plastered to her face, papers clutched in one hand. "Jack, the fuel's almost gone. If we lose power—" He didn't look up. "Then we do it the old way." Rex barked once, short and sharp, as if agreeing. He had been restless since dawn, pacing from door to window, nose pressed to the wind. The dog had learned to trust storms. He could tell when they were just weather and when they were warnings. The radio crackled faintly through the thunder. A distorted voice broke through. "Fishing vessel Ardmore. Engine failure. Near breakers north of Wraith's Point. Anyone copy?" Jack grabbed the receiver. "This is Wraith's Point Lighthouse. I copy. What's your position?" Static then. "Lost. Taking water. Can't see the coast light." Margaret's eyes met his. "We're their only line." Jack nodded once, turned to the echo loom. "Then we make some noise." He adjusted the machine's main dial to the harmonic frequency recorded during the first storm, the tone that had reached Halcyon. As he twisted the dial, the coils glowed faintly gold, pulsing with the rhythm of the sea. The machine hummed, matching the pitch of the wind like an orchestra tuning to the storm. Margaret hesitated. "Jack, the bell rope snapped last week." "I don't need it," he said, tightening his coat. "The mechanism still works if you strike the bell directly." She realized what he meant too late. "Jack, you can't go out there." But he was already halfway down the stairs, Rex close behind. The door fought him when he tried to open it, the wind pushing hard to keep him inside. When he finally forced it open, rain hit him sideways, needles of cold against his skin. He pulled the hood tight, bent his head, and stepped into the chaos. The great bronze bell hung just beyond the base of the tower, its surface streaked green with age, its mouth yawning toward the sea. The last bolt holding the bell rope had snapped, and the line lay coiled, useless on the stones. Jack picked up a length of driftwood and jammed it into the frame. The wind tore at his jacket. The dog barked once, trying to be heard above the roar. Jack struck the bell. The sound rolled out, low and deep, a voice older than the storm. The vibration crawled through his chest, his bones, the ground beneath his feet. He hit it again and again, shaping the rhythm from memory. Short, long, long, short. A pattern used by the old Signal Corps to mark distress. He had used it once in Iraq, in another kind of storm. Lightning split the sky. For an instant he saw the sea boiling below, and beyond it a faint light. The Ardmore still fighting. He struck the bell again, harder this time. The sound wove through the thunder, found the frequency of the wind, and began to carry. Inside the tower, Margaret watched from the doorway, shielding her face. The echo loom vibrated violently, its coils glowing brighter, as if feeding on the resonance. Instruments began to shift on their own, tuning themselves. The hum grew until the very air shook. She ran to the console, yelling into the storm, "Jack, it's amplifying your signal!" Jack didn't hear her. He hit the bell one last time, and the tone that came out was not his own. It was the bell answering itself, alive, deeper, endless. The storm seemed to shudder under it. From the sea came a faint response, the echo of the Ardmore's foghorn, broken but alive. Margaret caught the sound and grabbed the radio. "This is Wraith's Point. Follow the signal, north by northwest. You'll see the light." The voice came back, ragged but clear. "We've got it. We're turning now. God bless you." She let out a shaky laugh, then turned to the loom. The coils sparked, a faint blue shimmer rippling through the metal like veins of light. She reached out to shut it down, but then the machine gave one last pulse. For a moment, the room filled with sound. Not the storm, not the bell. Voices, hundreds of them, layered over one another, whispering, laughing, calling names lost to time. Some were soft as waves, others sharp as wind through stone. The light flickered, the pressure dropped, and then silence. Margaret fell to her knees. "Jack." He staggered back into the tower, soaked to the bone, leaning against the door. "It's done," he said hoarsely. "They're safe." Rex pressed against his leg, trembling. Margaret helped him to the bench, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "You could have been killed." Jack managed a faint smile. "I've been worse off. At least this time I hit the target." The generator coughed once, then died. The only light left came from the faint glow of the Echo Loom's heart. It pulsed once more, slow, steady, like breathing. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The sea lay flat and gray, its anger spent. A message crackled over the radio. "Ardmore reporting safe at harbor. Signal guided us clear. Tell the lighthouse keeper, thank you." Margaret smiled tiredly. "You're going to be a legend in this town. You know that?" Jack poured coffee from the dented thermos. "Legends don't get bills paid." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that holds more relief than joy. Then Margaret's face grew serious. "You realize what this means, Jack? That man, Kane, he's going to come back. After this storm, half the world's going to know what that machine can do." Jack looked toward the window, where the sea met the gray morning. "Then he'll have to go through me." Down below, the bell gave one final chime, gentle and true, as if agreeing. The sound rolled across the water, reaching the harbor before the sun did. The sea calmed after the storm, but the world did not. The air over Wraith's Point felt heavier now, not with danger, but with memory. The lighthouse had become something more than a structure of stone and brass. It was a beacon again, yes, but not only for ships. It called to people, though none could say how they heard the call. By the second morning, a handful of small boats were already moored at the base of the island. Fishermen, widows, an old priest, a young couple who'd lost their son to the sea. They all came in silence, carrying nothing but their grief. They had heard of the Ardmore, of how the bell had rung through the storm, guiding the lost home. In small towns, such stories travel faster than light. Jack Mercer stood at the base of the tower, shoulders square beneath his Carhartt jacket, watching them climb the rocky path. Rex waited at his side, calm but alert, ears turning toward every new voice. Margaret Haynes came up behind him, her notebook under one arm. "Word spreads faster than we can breathe," she said. Jack nodded. "Let them come. The place was meant for listening." The visitors gathered inside the keeper's house, the only space wide enough to hold them. Someone had brought candles. Their flames flickered along the old brick walls, throwing soft shadows across faces carved by years of sea and sorrow. The air smelled of salt, wax, and coffee. Jack spoke quietly, his voice low but steady. "I don't have sermons. I don't have miracles. All I can offer is sound, the kind that reminds us we're not alone." He turned toward the machine. The Echo Loom, now standing near the hearth, its metal dulled but still alive. The storm had changed it. Some of its plates were warped, but the glow inside was warmer, softer, as if it now breathed with them. Margaret handled the control lever carefully. "It might still work," she said. "If we keep the resonance low, it should react to ambient frequencies, to us." Jack nodded. "Let's keep it simple." She adjusted the knobs and the hum began. Low, like a tide drawing in, the sound filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards, through their bones. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, so the kind of tone that settles deep in the chest and makes a person remember. Then something remarkable happened. The hum began to shape itself, adjusting to the quiet sob of a woman near the window. Her name was Nora Bennett, a widow whose husband's boat had gone down 2 winters ago. As she cried, the hum seemed to echo the rhythm of her breath, soft, trembling, then easing. Her tears slowed. An old man beside her, Henry Lowell, a retired sailor with one good hand and a face weathered like driftwood, let out a shaky laugh. "It's answering her," he whispered, "like the sea when you talk to it." Margaret looked at the readings. "It's resonating with emotional frequency. It's aligning with us. Not just sound, but feeling." Jack said nothing. He didn't need to. He was listening to the tone, to the faint vibration beneath it, and somewhere deep to the memory of a voice that once told him not to let it go quiet. A child sat near the hearth. Lily May, no older than 10, clutching a weathered seashell to her chest. Her parents had drowned the year before, and she'd been living with an aunt in Port Talon. She had spoken to no one since the funeral. Now she tilted her head toward the sound and whispered something. Margaret leaned closer. "Did you hear that?" Jack nodded. The child was whispering in rhythm with the hum, not words exactly, but a melody. He crouched beside her. "That tune, where did you learn it, sweetheart?" She looked up at him, eyes bright through her tears. "It's what Mama used to hum when she brushed my hair." Jack's throat tightened. He touched the console gently. The machine responded with a soft chime, 3 notes that rose and fell exactly the way the girl had hummed. The candles flickered, though there was no wind. For a moment, everyone was silent. Then, slowly, the room filled with quiet sounds, a sigh, a sob, a laugh that broke halfway into both. The echo loom wove them together, turning human pain into harmony. When the hum finally faded, Nora Bennett wiped her eyes and managed a fragile smile. "It felt like he was here," she said. Henry nodded. Maybe he was. Maybe they all are, just waiting for someone to listen right. Margaret wrote something in her notebook, then looked up. "We should document this, Jack. Not for profit, for preservation, for healing. This could help people who've forgotten how to grieve." Jack leaned against the doorway, eyes on the gray horizon. "Grief's not something to fix, Margaret. It's something to share. That's what this place is for." Rex padded over to Lily May, sat beside her, and rested his head on her lap. She smiled faintly and began to pet him, her small hand steady for the first time in months. The dog closed his eyes and sighed, a soft, content sound, almost human. That evening, as the visitors prepared to leave, Margaret found Jack outside by the cliffs, looking out at the sea. The last light of day was fading, and gulls cut across the sky in thin, pale arcs. "You did something today," she said. "You turned a lighthouse into a sanctuary." He didn't answer right away. The wind ruffled his jacket. "Elias built the loom to call the lost home. Maybe he meant all of us." Margaret smiled faintly. "You really think the dead can hear us?" Jack looked toward the horizon, where the water met the fog. "Maybe they don't need to. Maybe it's enough that we remember how to speak." As the first stars appeared, he walked back toward the tower. Margaret lingered a moment longer, writing one last line in her journal before following. "No one really hears the voices of the dead. They hear the echo of their own love, reflected back by something vast enough to hold it." Inside, Jack placed a hand on the old bell's frame. The metal was cool, steady. He could feel the faint hum of the sea through it, the same heartbeat as always. Rex settled near his boots, eyes on the open door. And then, through the wind, came a whisper, not Mara's voice, not exactly, but something close, a warmth that carried meaning without words. Jack smiled, eyes soft. "The keeper's work," he murmured, "is never done." Rex's ears perked, tail thumping once. Outside, the fog rolled in again, gentle, patient, and full of unseen faces carried by sound. Winter slipped quietly into spring, and the echoes of that night had become stories told over warm coffee in Port Talon. The storms were fewer now, and the sea had traded its anger for patience. Along the harbor, gulls circled in slow spirals above the boats, and the salt wind carried the smell of thawed earth and new beginnings. On the horizon, Wraith's Point stood calm and sure, its lighthouse no longer a ruin, but a place of return. Jack Mercer leaned on the railing outside the keeper's house, mug of coffee cooling in his hands. Below him, volunteers from the town, fishermen, students, retired hands, worked together to repair the cracked stone steps. Margaret Haynes oversaw the effort with her usual quiet precision, clipboard tucked under one arm. It had been 3 months since the night of the great storm. Word of what happened had spread beyond Port Talon, reaching towns up the coast. Donations arrived by mail, small checks, handwritten notes, even photographs of loved ones lost at sea. Each envelope carried the same message in its own way. Thank you for giving us back a voice to remember. Jack didn't call it a miracle. He called it work. The Echo loom sat now in the heart of the lighthouse, restored piece by piece by local craftsmen. Jack had learned to treat it like a living thing, never forcing it to speak, only asking gently. It no longer glowed with stormlight. Instead, it hummed in warm tones, steady as a heartbeat. One morning, an old foundry owner named Caleb Dunn came to visit. He was a big man with soot-stained hands and a voice like gravel. "Got something for you, Mercer," he said, unloading a small crate from his truck. Inside was a newly cast bronze bell, gleaming like sunrise. Around its rim, engraved in careful letters, were the words, "For the ones who listen." Jack traced the letters with a finger. "You made this from the old ship metal?" Caleb nodded. "From the hull of the Ardmore and some of the lighthouse scrap. Figured the past deserves to keep ringing." Together they and a handful of townsfolk lifted the bell to the top of the tower. When they set it in place, it caught the wind just right and gave a single, low note that rolled down the cliffs and across the bay. Even those working in the harbor stopped and listened. It sounded like both an ending and a beginning. Later that week, Margaret brought him the final legal papers. "The Haven Trust is official," she said with a smile. "You're now the founding steward of Wraith's Point. It's protected in perpetuity. No one, not even the government, can sell or alter it without the consent of the trust." Jack nodded. "And the trust?" "It's in the names of those who helped restore it, the people, not the corporations." He looked out toward the sea, watching light glint off the waves. Elias would have liked that. Margaret softened. And so would Mara. He didn't reply, but she saw the quiet in his eyes, the peace that comes from finally keeping a promise. That evening, a small ceremony gathered inside the lighthouse. The townspeople filled the narrow room with laughter, candlelight, and music played on an old violin someone had brought. Jack said few words, just enough to thank them for their hands and hearts. Then he stepped aside, letting the sound take over. The echo loom joined in on its own, soft at first, weaving through the melody like another instrument. The air shimmered faintly, and those who listened close swore they could hear other voices in the harmony, whispers of those who'd once been lost to the sea. No fear in them, only gratitude. When the candles burned low and the last guests left for the ferry, Jack lingered by the lantern room, looking out over the sleeping bay. Rex sat beside him, tail curled neatly around his paws. The new bell gleamed above them, pale gold under the moon. Margaret approached, hands in her coat pockets. "It's strange," she said softly. "I've spent a lifetime drafting contracts and deeds, but this is the first one that feels like it might outlast me." Jack smiled. "Then you did it right." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'll stay here?" "For now," he said. "Someone's got to keep the light steady." "Maybe that's what we all do," she said. "Keep the light steady for someone else." She left soon after, the sound of her footsteps fading down the path. The night grew still again, only the waves below breathing against the shore. Jack turned to the echo loom one last time. Its brass plates reflected the lantern glow, faint and warm. He reached out and rested his hand on it. "You can rest now," he said quietly. "You've done your part." The machine gave a faint tone in response, gentle, content. Rex stood, ears pricking toward the sea. A light wind had risen, carrying a familiar scent of salt and rain. Jack followed the dog's gaze. Out beyond the rocks, far across the black water, a figure stood at the edge of the dock. A man in an old naval coat, posture straight, silver hair bright in the moonlight. He lifted his hand in salute. Jack blinked. When he looked again, the dock was empty. He smiled to himself. "Rest easy, Elias," he murmured. "The light's in good hands." The wind shifted again, brushing past the tower, making the new bell ring once, clear, strong, and low. The note rolled out over the bay, touching every roof in Port Talon, every wave that had ever carried loss. In the keeper's log that night, Jack wrote a single line: "The sea doesn't forget. It only waits for someone to listen." Rex lay down at his feet, eyes half closed, content in the silence. Outside, Wraith's Point shone once more, its beams sweeping the horizon, not as a warning, but as a promise that every lost thing someday would find its way home. Sometimes God doesn't speak through thunder or miracles. Sometimes He whispers through something smaller, the sound of a bell in the fog, the cry of a dog that refuses to leave your side, the quiet heartbeat of a man who still believes there's good left in the world. What happened at Wraith's Point wasn't science alone. It was grace. It was the kind of grace that finds us when we're too tired to keep searching and reminds us that even the darkest storms can carry a light meant only for us. Maybe that's what faith truly is. Not seeing the miracle, but hearing it. Hearing love echo back when you thought you'd lost it forever. So tonight, if you've lost someone, or if you're walking through your own storm, pause for a moment. Listen. The same God who calmed the sea still speaks in the silence between the waves. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or who you're remembering tonight. And if you believe that miracles still live quietly in the corners of this world, subscribe to this channel, and let's keep listening together. May the Lord bless you, keep you safe, and may His light guide you, just as it guided the keeper through the storm. Amen. Bandich goi de ban hiểu tinh thần, không đọc trong video.